Well, let's get started, my friends, because we've got a lot to talk about. I am so very excited to be offering this worship series for Lent. Listen, hearing that still small voice and finding your own. I was so attracted to this particular idea when I became acquainted with the 12 principles from thisweaffirm.org. And this is something we're going to talk to Eric Elmas about in just a moment. And that is that the Center for Innovation in Ministry here at San Francisco Theological Seminary, where I'm in residence for 2 years, they have created this website called thisweaffirm.org, which has 12 principles. And so I am, as part of my residency, creating fully scripted worship series for each one of these 12. And so when Eric comes on, we're going to talk about his contributions to that, where that originated. But suffice it to say, this is number 2 of the 12. And I chose this to do a Lent series with because it really evokes that worship as spiritual journey, which you know in the worship design studio I teach all the time. We want worship to feel like a spiritual journey from beginning to end, rather than yet another checklist and agenda to some sort of business meeting. We have way too many of those in our lives, and our spiritual journeys, our spiritual lives must be tended to, and worship is one of the ways that we do that. Now, this particular series is going to also encourage us to many other ways of connecting to God through prayer, through meditation on sacred texts, through small groups, through individual spiritual practices. And what we hope is that your congregation will get steeped in this, what we call sort of quiet yet on high alert, right? If you've watched that series trailer, you know that my series synopsis that I came up with this analogy of when you have you don't know where your phone is. You laid it down somewhere. I do this all the time. You've laid it down somewhere, and of course it's on vibrate. So you're going to call it, but it's not going to be loud, so you get really quiet and yet you're really alert. And so this is really the kind of attentiveness that we're going to hopefully nurture in this series with our congregations. And that is a real attentiveness to life, to our own inner life, into our own connection to the Spirit and what the Spirit is calling us, how the Spirit is calling us. And so that's what we want worship to be like as well. And so I have created these scripts where there is significant time for reflection, for silence, for meditative singing, for what Chuck Bell calls appointment with God, which we're going to talk to him about, so that we can really see our worship in this time as reflective of the kind of time we want to spend also outside of worship, coming to that still quiet center. Well, friends, what I have on the slide right now is the titles actually for the 6 Sundays in Lent. And you'll see that I use this sort of literary device. The first part of the colon is finding something, and the last part is listening to something. So we have finding your cave, which is going to relate to the Ezekiel text, not Ezekiel. The King's text. The King's text. I preached on Ezekiel recently. I got Ezekiel in the brain. But where Elijah goes and he's trying to find God and expects to hear God in a big, loud thing. And actually, God shows up in a thin, quiet, still, small voice. And so that's really the sort of seminal scripture for this series. So we encounter it first. Then we go into finding your breath, listening to our bodies, breathing as prayer, finding a word, listening to the text. And that really gets into how we encounter the text. Lectio Divina is a wonderful spiritual practice, and we're going to do a little sort of abridged version of that in worship. I've put that into the scripts. Finding your power, listening for healing. What does it mean to ask for healing? What does healing really mean? A healing of the spirit, a healing of the mind and body. Finding your mystic, listening beyond the voices, right? The voices inside our head. We're going to talk to Eric in just a moment about these sermons that he has that you can actually get. that he preached when he did this, and he has this wonderful sort of conversation with the voices in his head, right? And then finding your purpose, listening to your heart. That's Palm Sunday. Well, speaking of the scripts and materials, let me just say that in your downloads, whether you're a Worship Design Studio member, of course, members get all of our series, everything that I ever put out there into the universe. You get those free when you're a member, when you're an active member. And some of you bought Listen a la carte as sort of an introduction to the work that I do. But in your downloads, you got a document that had the scriptures and synopses. So a paragraph about each one of the services, what I call synopses, that helps you to see at a glance what are the scriptures and what's a description of that service. And you will recognize that in the scripts, you actually use those descriptions in the service to help bring people into the experience at the beginning of each service. We have an overview of the order of worship, which may be a little bit different than you normally do. It's different than I normally do because I have played with the idea of inviting people to come in to a very meditative sanctuary that is perhaps got some sound effect going on, but that the doors are closed and the ushers open it and let folks in and remind you to come in and just find a quiet place. So we're not going to mess that up with announcements, right? So in the scripts, I got announcements toward the end. Now, some of that may be too radical for some of you. And of course, in the overview document, you will hear me say that we expect that you're going to adapt these scripts in whatever way. So if that's too radical for your congregation and you just got to do those announcements up front, then perhaps you'll do your welcome and announcements and then take a deep breath and then enter into that more meditative kind of feel. But the overview will give you sort of a sense of the reasons why I did the order of worship the way I did it. And I'm a big believer in the fourfold pattern of Christian worship. So it's going to look and feel very similar to what you do, but just maybe with certain parts of it expanded or done a little bit differently based on the message. And this is something I teach in the Worship Design Studio, that this is why series is such a wonderful thing to do, because for a time, we can say, what is the overarching message, and what can we do with our worship that tweaks it just a little bit, just for these 6 weeks, that's going to help us to enter in more deeply. And then it begins to create a culture of flexibility with your congregation, so we don't always have to do it exactly the same. So then we have a document of music notes that sort of talks about our music choices, talks about more in detail about how to do various things, talks about that percussive opening, and percussive meaning ephemeral percussive, and we're going to talk to Chuck about that in just a moment. We have a document of visual and media ideas that's going to help you begin to prepare those prayer stations and all of the things that will help us to enter into the story through our eyes. We've got small group resource ideas in there, and we're going to talk a little bit with Eric Elnes about the videos that go with this series and the small group resources there. We have 2 original theme songs, so we have piano parts, we have guitar chords, lead sheets, and we also have a benediction song that I'll talk a little bit about in a moment. The series logo that you can use, and then use whatever program like Adobe Photoshop or whatever to overlay your church's information on it so that you can use that in your social media or make postcards or whatever you want to do, but you could use that logo. Of course, it's perfectly fine for you to come up with your own logo. We have a series video trailer that has space in it for you to overlay your congregation's information, and in the visual and media document will tell you about how to do that. And then I have a worship guide example, because I believe that the worship guide for this series ought to be also more artfully geared toward the message. And so I'm encouraging you to make an 8.5 or 11 by 17 folded. You end up with 4 pieces of paper like this, and then you order them so that you have one 11 by 17 that you fold, so that you end up with, I know this is kind of backwards when you get through, but you end up with something, that opens out like this, and then there's the end. But you see how I'm making some space in there for people to journal, because all of the readings, the scripture readings, are a kind of lectio divina. And so we want people to be able to write things that pop out as they hear the scripture, that kind of thing. So there's a worship guide example to give you kind of a format for how that could look. We have worship scripts for Ash Wednesday and 6 Sundays of Lent. And I just finished Holy Week, my friends. I know you're chomping at the bit for it. And so when we send you this recording, we will be also sending you that document that has, and I'm very excited about, I've wanted to do, and I have not yet done, but now I have wanted to create Stations of the Cross. And since this is kind of a pilgrimage series anyway, where we're going to prayer stations throughout, then it made sense for Holy Week, my Holy Week service, to include this pilgrimage to the Stations of the Cross, which is not just a Catholic thing. It's more and more used by Protestants as well. So scripts, and then sold separately are sermons by Eric Elnes, small group videos from Darkwood Brew. And speaking of which, Eric Elnes, I think you're with us. If you'll pop your camera on, that would be awesome if you can find that camera icon down there. He is joining us from a very full day.
Trying to pop my camera on. It's not becoming unred-lined.
Oh, well, okay. Huh. Well, we can hear you loud and clear, Eric, and I have your picture up here. So, you know, you might actually look better in the picture than you do in person.
I look much better in the picture than I do today. So.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for coming on. And, you know, this is the beginning, where this is the very first, well, we've collaborated a lot before, okay? I mean, with Gifts of the Dark Wood, my first fully scripted Lent series, but also other narrative lectionary series that we've done in the Worship Design Studio. But this is the first of the 12 of the affirmations at thisweaffirm.org. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, the affirmations have a history to them. They really started to have their genesis with a group of ministers from Phoenix, Arizona, who were kind of recognizing that people who are typically associated with quote-unquote progressive Christianity are really good about talking about what they're against, but not very good about talking what they're for. And we wanted to sit down, and I was part of this group, and I was living in Phoenix at the time, and we wanted to sit down on a single piece of paper by chance, if we could just encapsulate what makes us really joyful about being Christians. And so that document went through 27 major and minor revisions. I was the editor of it. And when we finally hit version 3.8, it just sang to people across denominational lines. We had eventually had not only us clergy, but biblical scholars, theologians, and lay people from around the country across denominational lines, and it just totally sang to people. So we held it at that. The document was called The Phoenix Affirmations. And not to be confused with my book, The Phoenix Affirmations. My book is a commentary on the Phoenix Affirmations. By that title, but the Phoenix Affirmations themselves were written by this huge group of people, and we walked them across the country in 2006, actually. Wow. And it was quite a phenomenal experience, and so many people lit up. We just met with church after church after church across denominational lines too, and so it's really they've fully arrived in their time in terms of the spirit of the moment in the United States. And the San Francisco Theological Seminary, in collaboration with the Convergence Network, decided let's make an entire lectionary around these Phoenix affirmations. Because we really think that these affirmations are really more about the future in America than the past. And so they created this website called thisweaffirm.org and created something called the Living Lectionary. And the resources on thisweaffirm.org are all organized around each one of those Phoenix affirmations.
Right. So it's really an incredible resource. And really what we're doing, Eric and I are doing, is to take the, and actually we did, you did pick scriptures in 6-week series for your Darkwood Brew video online sort of talk show, internet talk show kind of format. And so what I'm doing then is creating these series based on the scriptures you chose around these affirmations, so that churches can, like this Listen series, do my fully scripted worship, but also have the Darkwood Brew video small group resources to go along with it. And so those are sold separately, but we want to encourage folks to take a look at that and consider that for a small group accompaniment to this worship series.
If I could just make a note about those things too.
Yeah.
The sermons are actually come to you if you order them in a Word document. They're meant to be, you can cut and paste from them freely. You don't need to, unless you publish them, you don't need to credit me or anything. So they provide some good grist for the mill. And then the Darkwood Brew resources that Marcia is referring to, they're really set up so that you do not have to have any kind of theological or biblical knowledge in order to lead a really killer small group. What we did was we took about the 20 to 25 minutes of the real nugget of the program, and it's a video series, and we put in pause points with suggested questions. We have leaders guides, so that you could start 20 groups if you have got enough people there, without having to lead a single one.
That's right. It's really easy to do, and so it's kind of self-sufficient. And the questions are there and the times to pause and all that. So it's really a wonderful resource. And what you do on them is not only offer your input, but you interview, very well-known theologians and people who are working to make the world a better place. And so it's just really fodder for a lot of great conversations. And I have to tell you, Eric, that churches that have used, especially around our Gifts of the Dark Wood Lent series that we did a couple years ago and used videos, the churches who are using the Darkwood Brew videos for small groups are loving it. So really kudos, and I want you to know what I hear out there in the world from folks as well.
We have a great time with it, and we're just really pleased that churches have really responded well. If you like the Darkwood, if you try those out and you like it, there's actually 28 full series. And in fact, there's a 6-part series on each of the Phoenix affirmations. And the Listen series actually has a bonus episode on it too, Finding God in Music. So
So I do want to say to those of you who are doing this series and who are going to use the Darkwood Brew videos, in our small group resource document that you got with your downloads, it does say that some of them are a little bit reordered because we made this for Lent. So I reordered some of the way that they have them. So that will give you all the instructions about which one to use which week. And then the sermons actually are also sold separately. So you just go to marciamcfee.com, click on store, and you'll see those there. They're $10, and oh my gosh, you're going to get, if you don't use excerpts just completely, just pull it out and use it, as Eric has so generously offered, it will also give you simply fodder for your own. It's sort of some exegetical work for you in some ways, because Eric is our expert, our scriptural expert. Oftentimes in our worship design studio, helps us to dig deeper into things. So I really highly suggest either of those resources as an add-on to the worship series. So Eric, thank you so much for being on and talking with us. You look fabulous in your picture. I'm sure you look exactly the same live. Thank you so much. Yes, actually, somebody just asked, the videos are separate costs. Yes, those are separate. You go to darkwoodbrew.org/listen, and you can see those. Eric, I'm not remembering how much that is, but it will be all plain to you there, because you can just do that one, right? Or you can get a subscription which gives you access to a lot.
Yeah, they're I think they're $49.95, and there's a 10% off special right now. So they're
Woohoo!
Good. Yeah.
Yay! Thank you.
Pleasure.
Wonderful. So Jenna has put the link to that, to the sermons in the chat, and maybe Jenna, if you could just put that link to darkwoodbrew.org/listen so people can click on that and go look at that real quick. Awesome. All right, Eric, thank you so much for being with us. Pleasure. And you'll be with many of these folks through the videos or through the sermons. And so thank you for walking this journey with us.
Hey, my pleasure. Good to join you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
All right, friends. So those are some of the wonderful things that you can add on. You'll see on the slide here that I have the episodes connected to the weeks, and that's what you would see in our small group resources document to help you navigate that. You can see some of the names here that he interviews in those. Bishop Yvette Flunder, who I've heard preach, which is just amazing. Bruce Epperly is somebody that I know well. Doug Paget is one of the major voices, theologians at the moment. So, Eric does a really wonderful job of drawing voices in to help challenge us and help us expand our understanding and learn more. So just wonderful grist for the mill. Okay, so let's take a little bit of a look at a little bit more of sort of the small group kind of opportunities. And in that document, we talk about you could get people together who have common interests, or you could have people do these things individually. There are books that we link to, spiritual practice through running and jogging, through skiing. It's a link to my book on skiing and spiritual practice. So if you're near the mountains or somebody that is, loves the snow, it's not just downhill skiing, it's cross-country skiing or snowshoeing. There is a link, the slide that I have right now is about Bible journaling. Oh my goodness. I just got exposed to this spiritual practice when somebody who does it came to one of my elevation retreats in Tahoe. By the way, the one in May still has just a few slots left. So if you're interested in that, go to my calendar page and check it out. But she brought her toolkit of markers and all these kinds of wonderful things. Think of it as a cross between scrapbooking and journaling with the Bible, in the Bible. And you can see in this slide some of the examples. And it's just amazing. It's like doodling in your Bible. But the doodling is actually that spiritual practice, right? It is actually that praying. So praying doesn't always have to be sitting still and quiet. It can involve embodiment, action. And so this kind of doodling in your Bible, and they have special Bibles that already have some of the key words of a page written in the margins, so that helps you get started. Or there's big wide margins where you can draw, but people just draw right on top of the words, and then maybe even draw around. One verse will pop out at them, and so they'll draw right around it, highlight that. It is absolutely stunning. I fell in love with it. So if you're a doodler of any age, this is such a cool thing to do. And on our Pinterest page, our Worship Design Studio Pinterest page, and maybe Jenna, you can put a link to that on the board that's called Listen. I put some of my favorite things but you can just put Bible journaling in search in Pinterest, and you will find all kinds of things, how-tos and that kind of thing. But we've put links in the small group resource page to finding out more about that and how you can start that group. So it could be several groups of different generations, or it could be generations together. But like I was saying, there are several different ideas that we put in there because no one person prays the same as another person. There's a book called Praying in Color that we have a link to. The idea is that people find some way to connect a practice that they do throughout the week with this theme, right? Some way that they can find a way to listen to that still small voice, to have a meditation time, but it doesn't have to be sitting in a chair completely still. Now that's fine, but if that's not what floats your boat, there's so many different ways to pray. And so we hope that you will do that. Prayer beads is another thing that I have fallen in love with. And so making prayer beads, we have another series in the Worship Design Studio that uses these prayer beads. It's called All My Days. And people have used that series, fall in love with making prayer beads. And there are churches today who did the series years ago, and they're still making prayer beads to give away because they love it so much. And it is so much fun. I can tell you that right now. And so we have put an example of going to the craft store, finding beads that symbolize different things, and then creating a little thing to follow about what each bead means so that you can have some structure to your prayers. That's one thing that keeps a lot of us from praying, is because we just sit there and we go, what am I supposed to say? I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing. So when you get some structure around that, people all of a sudden it opens up a way to pray that feels like it has purpose, that it has a beginning, a middle, and end. And this is something people have been doing across religions, across faiths, across the globe, is finding ways to have a tangible way to pray. And prayer beads can be one of those ways. So that's really cool. So many different ways. Now, we also created, Shelley helped me do this. Thank you, Shelley. This book, Let Your Life Speak, is not a new book, but it is a book that I pull off the shelf regularly to remind myself about vocation, about getting in touch with the depths of what I am really called to do. Because when you are in touch with that purpose, then living our lives fully becomes such a joy. And Parker Palmer just writes beautifully about this. So if you want a book study rather than a video study, or in addition to, this would work well. And you could do it in small groups, or you could just give people the pages that we put there in that small group resource and let them do it on their own as they read the book, or even in partners. So, lots of different ways. I think that probably the key is to kind of know your folks, know what might be interesting to them. Don't offer the whole kit and caboodle unless you have a big enough church where you can facilitate that. But offer enough variations that people really find the thing that is going to speak to them, is going to give them. So when they come to worship, it's a way to take all of that they've been doing all week and then in community be there and be still and connect with all of that wisdom. So Chuck Bell, I know you're there. Come on out from hiding. Give us your video. Let's talk about music.
There I am.
Yay! There he is. Awesome. Yay. Chuck, I'm so glad that you could be with us today in your studio there in Dahlonega, Georgia. So we're coast to coast here.
Here we are.
Yeah. So Chuck, once again, we have put together a couple of little refrains. And as a series, this series probably has more repeated, or what I call thread item, music pieces than any of the others that we've done. And mainly that's because that cyclical refrain, which the cyclical structure means it's something that repeats over and over again, is meant to take us deeper. And that's what the whole series is about. What is your experience of those, of doing music that repeats, that has that repetitious quality?
Well, for me, it's once it becomes repetitive, it doesn't get old for me. What it does is it ingrains itself inside of me, and it becomes part of my heartbeat if I hear something over and over again. And I think that the more you hear something, the more little nuggets you find in it that you didn't hear the first time you heard it. I think back to maybe those churches that say the creed every Sunday. That sometimes, by the time you've said it 50 or 60 times, you might think that you know it by heart. But then when you say it one day again, maybe the 51st time, you're going to hear something completely different than what you heard before. Now, these songs we're not repeating 50 times in one service.
No.
Anything like that. But it's our hope that what Marcia has constructed lyric-wise and music-wise and the arrangements that I put in there, that there is some variations and some things that you can hear as you repeat these songs over and over again.
Right. So the Come and Rest song is what we call threshold moment, part of the threshold moment. And it originally, we did this, actually, I borrowed from ourselves on this, because this was the prayer song actually for Gifts of the Dark Wood. But the lyrics that I wrote, come and rest, come and listen. I mean, I can't not use that for a series called Listen. So I just borrowed for myself. But it's a little bit different. I've added a second verse. And And so that will come back around towards the end of that threshold moment. So let's talk about this threshold moment. Those of you who have never done my series before, haven't studied with me, a threshold moment is that moment in the service where we cross over from business as usual into a feel of heightened attention and depth of spirit. We enter the ritual, and then what we hope is that it's just going to flow from one thing to the next. And that's what writing these scripts, I hope, is modeling and demonstrating for you. And what that means is that the music sometimes will play underneath some of this of the speaking. And what Chuck has done is, wherever possible, he's actually given your accompanists some things to play in those times when they're speaking on top of that. Chuck, would you give us just a quick kind of primer on some of the things to think about when you're playing, when you're in that mode of playing underneath somebody talking?
Absolutely. So one of the biggest mistakes that I made early on in my career, and what I continue to assist other people with of how to break this bad habit, is to take songs that are very well known and to use those as underscore. So if Marcia was doing a prayer, and let's say the prayer was about, I don't know, just about creation and being thankful for that, and in the background I'm doing this.
Guess what people are actually hearing and thinking in their mind.
That's right.
Not what I'm saying.
No. So what I've done with these little snippets inside the thread song and this Come and Rest song is that I've created space for the spoken word to sort of pop out amongst this arrangement. And the accompanist then has the ability to just play something very simple. It allows the song to continue without necessarily having very rhythmic stuff underneath it.
Right.
So this is there's 3 repeated sections in the Come and Rest with that accompaniment with that underscore, but it should give you an opportunity to explore some, once you learn how to do those 3 repeats, there might be some additional things you want to add on top of it, and you can do that. I mean, this should just be an example of how to do this. And I'm already seeing right now that somebody asked, what do you do if you don't have a musician?
Yeah.
And that can be difficult to do underscoring when you don't have a musician. But I do want to say that underscoring is not necessary for you to glorify God. That you don't have to have it always. But
however, anybody can play a rain stick.
That is right. That was my second statement, is that there are a lot of other instruments that you can use as just accompaniment or background music that keeps something like that going. And we're going to probably talk about that in just a few minutes.
Well, let's talk about it now. Let's talk.
Okay.
So at the beginning of the threshold moment, even before the Come and Rest music comes in, one of the things that we suggest is that as the light processes toward the front, and we stand and turn and face it and watch it come, that we've got this ethereal kind of percussion going on. When I say percussion, I mean instruments that you're able to do something non-rhythmic with. So, for instance, Chuck, give us some ideas.
Okay, so you can see kind of, let me move this around. So I've got a wind chime that's right here. So basically it has a nice little...
And you can get those from like a garden store, right?
Yeah, you don't
they don't
necessarily
have to be a musical.
These are called bar chimes, so they're more orchestral. But yes, you can. I've seen you use multiple times in a drum circle, Marcia. You break out the wind chimes, and somebody uses them just to kind of hit them and pluck them and make a cool sound over that. So there's shakers right now. These are percussion shakers, and normally you would hold these and do this.
Right.
But for this purpose, we might just shake them a little bit. They come in all different sizes and sounds.
Right.
And you can even make these out of little simple Tupperware. I've seen you do this. This is a Marcia McFee trick. And I'm about to do it with a drum circle I'm doing this week with some 5th graders. But
Yay.
Marcia, talk about how you made some of your own shakers.
Yeah, well, you go to the store and they've got all these little Tupperware, like smaller kind of things. You would just put some leftovers in, And so I get those and I put popcorn, not popped popcorn before you pop it, corn or beans or whatever, rice, whatever you put in there is going to give a different sound. And so you can actually make those. I used to make them out of film canisters, but guess what? Nobody's using film anymore. So those are like becoming antiques. But yeah, you can make a lot. You can make a rain stick out of a cardboard tube. I mean, just Google that. And if you don't know what a rain stick is, I'm going to go grab mine. Chuck, say something fabulous while I'm gone. Okay.
Well, as Marcia's gone to get her rain stick, there's also something called, well, let me show you some more shakers. So even if you don't want to make your own, there are some other shakers that you can get. This is called a cachiche. It's a Guatemalan instrument that's used to make different sounds, whether you slap or pull it back the other way. So even shaking this gives a completely different sound than what something like this sounds like. Right. Marcia, I see that you brought your rain stick, and guess what?
I got my rain stick. Do you have a rain? So let's do dueling rain. Oh my gosh, you have two.
Well, I've also got a monsoon stick that I'm going to show you in a second because these are really cool also. So let's do some rain.
Okay. Here we go. And see, you can just hold them or you can shake them a little bit, which gives it a little bit of a sound effect.
Yep. Now here's the thing about rain sticks is that yes, they are linked. You can get them on all different links, and they do make different sounds. But once they get to the bottom, I'm going to do this one fast.
Okay.
That only lasted about, I don't know, 5 seconds maybe. Well,
right.
This instrument, this is made by a percussion company called LP. This is a monsoon stick. They've done different chambers in here that allow this stick to last over 20 seconds by just flipping it. So normally you would have to flip and you would have to rotate in order for things to happen. This one, it's just going to keep going.
Cool. That's cool. A monsoon stick. I've never seen one of those before. You can also use different drums, but instead of playing it rhythmically, instead of doing that, you might just give a little sound effect, rhythmically, and then I sometimes take my fingernails and.
Oh, yeah. Here's a small djembe that I think I picked up for $12 at a music store. I mean, very easy to do the same thing with.
Yeah, just a little, right. Yeah, so the point is that you don't want it to be too busy, right? The whole point of this is the spaces between. So you want to practice this with your folks. So if you have people ringing surrounding the congregation with these things, maybe it's the choir. Maybe the choir is going to do it. You want to practice it so that people get a sense of listening to each other and allowing some space so that it's not happening all at the same time. The other thing that is really cool, if you have a singing bowl, I have a singing bowl that doesn't work, so that's why I didn't pull it out. But a singing bowl, or you can use a handbell with a wooden there's a special wooden thing that you do that, and it creates this a drone kind of thing underneath the whole thing. But you also, if you are a keyboard player that has a keyboard, a synth that creates these kinds of things, you can also create kind of a drone underneath these percussive sounds, right?
Yeah, and you can also do this with an organ. I'm going to switch cameras just so you can see my piano real quick. And Marcia, can I just give a 30-second example of this so people who are trying to imagine what it sounds like?
Yeah.
So those of you that play piano, this might drive you a little crazy because the piano is going to be backwards when you see it because my studio is not set up yet specifically for what I need for this. So you're actually looking at so my right hand looks like the left hand and the left hand looks like the right. So all I'm doing is just can you hear that drone?
Yep.
So all I'm doing is holding down a D and an A. You can do this on a principal organ, a soft string, any of that stuff. And so once you've established not major or minor, it's an open chord, D and A. Then I can add
Can you just imagine that the candle, the acolyte, is coming down the aisle slowly during this? And this would continue underneath that synopsis. And then as the candle is getting lit, that's when the accompaniment for Come and Rest would start. Right? Yeah, so you get that, exactly. That's the feel that we want. Mm-hmm. Not too busy, not too much, but just this nice sort of it's almost like getting inside. When you go underwater and you hear differently, right? The sonic kind of feel is different. That's kind of what we're trying to create. And when you have these instruments around the sanctuary, then you get that sort of surround sound kind of feel. And that's the mystery and awe that this threshold moment is inviting us to come and be in the presence of God.
Yeah. Marcia, and I'm just now remembering that I need to put something. I'll do this. I'm going on to make a commitment to do this. On my website, if you search for the Come and Rest Listen Lenten service, I'm going to put together like a 5-minute drone that's just that, various movement stuff that you can go on and get that from my website. And then if you don't have a keyboard or an organ that can do this, then you can play that audio track and then just add your own percussion instruments underneath it.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that would be helpful.
Well, it sounds like it might, although I want to encourage people to try to create these sounds themselves. And in cases where, you need help, because we have some worship design studio member churches who are like 5 and 6 people. And so having that might be very helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool.
Look for that sometime in the next week. I'll get it up there.
Great. Well, and also want to say that if you did Gifts of the Dark Wood and you used Come and Rest, we switched it up a little bit so that, because the Come and Rest has an echo part, but the echo part isn't right away congregational friendly because it kind of overlays a long phrase over another long phrase. And so what I'm suggesting in this is that congregations always sing the first part, the leader part, and then the choir be that echo, right? But So the first Sunday, and this is what we always say around new music, the first Sunday, just let your choir do it. Do all the parts, right? And it goes into harmonies. And in the script, I say exactly, sing it in unison and sing it in harmonies and then sing it with the echo. After a couple of weeks, your congregation is going to have this in their heads because it's simple, it's repetitive. And so they can begin to do that leader part while the choir is doing the harmonies and is doing the echo part. This is also true of Meet Me Here, which is our new prayer song for this series. And that one has, Chuck has written SATB parts for that. And so we're gonna send out with the recording, the Holy Week service, and some of these newer parts. Chuck also did a flute recorder part for the Come and Rest because people heard that on our trailer and said, "I want the flute part." So Chuck had to make one up because, of course, he was just improvising on the recording. So thank you for doing that. So that's all you're all gonna have that so that you can utilize that. So there's the Come and Rest, there's the Meet Me Here, and then there's music that goes underneath what I've borrowed a phrase from you, Chuck Bell, for this series called Appointment with God. So after the sermon, there's going to be some significant time where people are going to prayer stations, and this is kind of in the place of spoken prayers, how you might normally do spoken prayers. And what, if you have been doing the same order of worship in the same way for 50, decades, one of the things that would be important for you to do is to let people know that we're because of the message of this series, because we're focusing on practices, on listening, on different ways of praying, we're going to be using this for this season. And then next season, after Easter, go back to the way you've done it before so that you create this trust that says, even though we're going to do it different this time, doesn't mean we're going to we've thrown the baby out with the bathwater. So create that trust. But appointment with God is something that you began to do years ago, Chuck. And tell us just a little bit about the role of music when people are in a contemplative, prayerful, meditative space and perhaps going to different places. What's the role of music, and what do we want to think of for that time in preparing our music?
Well, it's almost the same understanding that you're underscoring spoken word, in the sense that, you don't want to be too intrusive in what you're doing, yet you want to provide an atmosphere that is that matches the environment that you're in. So if there is contemplative moment that's happening or people moving, you don't want to pick a song that's going to be, you don't want that.
Right. You really are creating the mood in which people are going. It doesn't mean you have to be super soft all the time.
No.
But it's prayer songs, right?
It is. And there are times when I'm going to switch back to the other camera just so you can kind of see how simple some of this stuff is that we're talking about. When I'm creating a moment that moves into something that has a piano or organ accompaniment underneath it, usually that music is coming from something that we just did. So that song, Meet Me Here, is leading into that. Is that right? I'm looking for the script. So already we're in a specific key. So what I would do is try to figure out, however you're going to end that song. I forget how it ended directly on there. So I might just hold on that final chord. There might be some instructions that are given if they have to be. And then I'm just going to take my right hand, it looks like my left on the screen, sorry about that. And then I'm just going to add simple melody over it. Now this is where you can be a little bit more creative. Maybe I'm going to take that Meet Me Here that we just did and I'm going to play it over this structured chord here, so at least it reminds them as they're moving around, they've got something they're singing. So I might do. Slow it down a little bit. So the key with any of this underscoring, whether it's a movement or someone spoken, you just want to match the moment that's happening. And sometimes that does not mean something that is really already scripted, a full prelude, postlude type song. You're not looking for that. Really what you're looking for is just something that's very simple. You can even take a hymn. Let's say it's in the key of C also. Maybe if I'm continuing that same chord, maybe I find, this is my story, this is my song, Blessed Assurance. And I can even play that simple melody on top of that if that's what the direction I feel like is happening in the room.
So basically, appointment with God time, as people are going to stations, you treat it much the same you treat communion time, right? The music that you want happening during communion, creating a particular mood. You might decide that that's going to be choral if you want another choral spot. You might just be instrumental. It might be a band that's doing a song, but it is creating that mood, and you're not encouraging people to sing with you at that point. They may sing with you, but you're not leading them particularly because they are doing other things. So it's really music as setting the mood. And actually, talking about giving instructions, Chuck and I did kind of a demo of the Meet Me Here song, where then I sort of demonstrate how I'm going to invite people to go to the prayer stations. So you can see how instructions can be made more palatable and keep us in the mood by having the music continue underneath there. And that's really what that underscoring the point of that underscoring is to keep that happening. So, really the beautiful creative place for musicians in this series is kind of collecting all of those beloved songs that evoke prayer, evoke connection with God, evoke relationship with God, evoke relationship, connecting deep in our hearts. Just collect as much of that beloved material that is beloved to your congregation so that you can use that throughout this series. Because we really do want people to connect in a heart place during especially this appointment with God. So it's a time to really connect with those good songs. And always check out chuckbellmusic.com, because Chuck has some beautiful arrangements to familiar hymns, some of which you may decide that you want to use. And then, Chuck, you also have a Holy Week collection, right?
I do. It's a Holy Week piano suite that walks you through Palm Sunday, Maundy Thursday, Good Friday. In this case, I did a Holy Saturday, and then sunrise for Easter Sunday. They're written for piano currently, and for those of you that do have a player at your church that reads, these would be great for preludes or offertories. Specifically, the Good Friday, a lot of churches don't observe Good Friday for many reasons, but there's that piece that's called Death of the Christ is a very powerful piece that goes from Jesus' last breath to the actual act of dying through music, and it can be a very powerful moment to end the service or to have it in there just as a beginning anywhere in there. So you can get the Death of Christ for free. It's a download that's for free. And if you don't have a piano player, there's also recordings of it that you can pull of the entire Holy Week Piano Suite series. Right.
So for Holy Week, the Holy Week service that you're all going to get as soon as I send that out today, with the recording of this webinar, there are Stations of the Cross. And so there's ample time, again, for musicians to be offering music for that, going to stations. Now, I'm going to talk about Holy Week in just a moment, but there are different ways you can do the stations, but one of them would be for all the stations to be in the sanctuary, if you have room to do that in your sanctuary. And then you would definitely want to pay attention to what you're doing sonically as people go to these stations. Chuck, it's always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you so much again for a wonderful collaboration. I am really looking forward to people singing our newest one, Meet Me Here, because I think it has this, it's very tender, and the arrangement that you put to it, you guys got to know that here's the way we create. I get this little tune in my head and I start humming it around the house, and then I put on my recorder on my phone and I sing it really badly into the recorder. And then I send it to Chuck and I say, make it sound amazing. And he does. So it's a really wonderful process. So I am so grateful for you, Chuck Bell, and your music will touch many people this Lent season through this.
Well,
so
thank you, Marcia, for the opportunity. It's always great to find ways to commune with the holy alongside.
Yep, that's right. So. Okay, thank you so much, Chuck. All right, friends. Just want to mention that the benediction song is by my friend Christopher Grundy, and he has the arc of the feel of the service goes a little bit more energetic at the end, so that we get ourselves out the door. And so when I remembered this song by my friend called "Listening Now," and we're so thankful that you are still speaking. You're still speaking, gracious God, for the sake of the world you are seeking. We are listening now. Something like that. I've got a cold, so I'm kind of a tenor today. But it is a beautiful song that says we are listening now. And it's a wonderful benediction song. Again, it will be a thread piece, so that you will repeat it. So by the time you get to the second, third, fourth Sunday, people will be really familiar with it, but Christopher has given us in your downloads something that you can use actually in the worship guide so that people can see the music and learn that piece. You might not have to put it in the worship guide every time once you get past 3, 4, because it's very catchy, and it'll be, all of these songs will be earworms by the time you get to the end of the Lent series. Okay, let's talk a little bit about visuals, my friends. Just as we were talking about the music being sparse, having those spaces in between, that's what we want to do with our visuals. You know, last year my Lent series was Roll Down Justice, and that was about adding more and more and more with those blue strips and creating this huge waterfall. But this one, listen, we want to do something that offers simplicity, that offers something that says that the spaces between the things are just as important as the things themselves, right? And so this Japanese art of ikebana is what we're suggesting that you sort of try your hand at. Again, on our Worship Design Studio Pinterest board, I've put several examples of that and some links to where you can learn more about ikebana flower arranging. And just these pictures I have here on the slide, you can see how different it is from the usual sort of abundant flower arrangement that we usually have. So you might have to, if you work with a florist, you might have to have a conversation and find out if they can do something a little different, or if they can, maybe this is a time for you to establish a relationship between your florist and the people in your church, and maybe you get together with them and learn this art of creating these ikebana arrangements. That could be a really wonderful thing to do. I was very attracted to these tall glass vases with these flowers in it, covered in water with these floating candles on the top. I think that's stunning. But all that to say as well that light is focus. And so, you know, those under the counter lights, pin lights that you get at like IKEA or any sort of kitchen place, those little pin lights are really great for creating some lighting focus on visuals. Now, if you don't have a place to plug them in near your visual installation, whether that's table, altar, whatever you call it, or a separate one, remember in the Worship Design Studio, I talk about incremental steps. So if you've never done something different on your table, you might want to start with a different table as a visual installation. But if you don't have a plug nearby, go to a sporting goods store and get those fishing headlamps. They're really bright, but they run on batteries, and that can also give you some uplight on your flower arrangements that would really help it pop and stand out, no matter the lighting in your room. So that's going to be super fun. Now, the prayer stations. This is where your visual arts team is really going to spend a majority of their time on this series, creating these prayer stations. And while there is each Sunday has a particular prayer station that is more aligned with the theme of that Sunday, my suggestion is to have all 6 of these available the whole time. So there is this kind of, again, spiritual practices are those things that we repeat and deepen as we repeat them. And so if you have the space in your sanctuary to have all 6 of these every week, then I suggest that. But if you don't, then of course, you can just do the one for that Sunday and experience a different one every Sunday. And so we've got extensive notes about those prayer stations, how to create them, some alternative options. You're going to have to really come up with what's going to work in your space. And if you do have all 6 every time, one of the ways that I've created that we get to focus on the one that's more aligned with the theme is in the children's time. We call it discovery time. And so the children would actually be guided in doing that prayer station on that week. And so that helps us focus on that. And, you know, our Worship Design Studio associate, Michelle Whitlock, has written a wonderful document for us to help understand how we can include children and help them enter into these prayer stations most successfully. And the point is that we're not going to talk about the prayer station necessarily, but really let them engage with it, because children engage with the subject matter through action, not just through thinking about it. So that really is the focus for the children's discovery time in each worship service, is to have them engage with a particular station that goes along with the theme. So there's a lot of great things going on in these stations. Have you started making your little booklets? Here, I've got mine that I made on the how-to video. Oh my gosh, that was so much fun, right? And I'm just thrilled to have these little booklets that I've been doing for many years, learned from my good friend Cynthia Winton Henry. She taught me how to do them. But you'll have to start making these beforehand so that you have enough for everybody in the pews or the chairs. And each week people get to write a reflection on one of the pages. And then in between Sundays, you switch them around in the pews or chairs so that the next Sunday people can read what somebody wrote as a reflection, and then they can write their own as well. Now, what to do with these at the end, that you have to decide that. One of the things you could do is on Palm Sunday, you could invite people to write in it and then take it home, and then have them read one every day during Holy Week as part of their prayer practice. That's one idea. The other idea is to have people get one, claim one during the Holy Week service. But if you don't have a lot of people coming back for your Holy Week service, in other words, if you're going to have not as many people, you might want to let people take them home on Palm Sunday. So different things you can do with those. Or perhaps you'll decide that you want to take those to some folks. Maybe there's a nursing home or a hospital or somewhere that you would like to deliver those as devotional booklets. So it's kind of up to you what you end up doing with those. Those are just some ideas, but I'm excited. And if you take pictures of your booklet making parties and post them on Worship Design Studio Facebook page, we'll make an album like we usually do, or just post them on your page and put #listen on it so that we can find them. Okay, and we'll because we want to see you doing your parties for making all of these booklets. Okay, so one thing I did not put in the visual document that I just want to say here is where to get dissolving paper. I usually get mine from a place called tophatmagic.com, but there are many places you can get them. You can Google it. You can use keywords dissolving paper, spy paper, disappearing paper. The point is it's paper that's made to dissolve in water. And that's one of our stations. So I just wanted to let you know where to get that. And you want to go ahead and order that now, right? So that you can get that and have that ready. Sometimes it comes in little pieces. Sometimes it comes in sheets that you'll need to cut up. Sometimes it comes, I have a picture here on the slide of it coming in little hearts. Can come in different shapes. The point is you don't want each person to have too big of a piece because it will get kind of murky. Just a small piece is what you want. Okay. So Pinterest page, pinterest.com/worshipstudio/listen. We've got all kinds of things there, from some wind chime ideas to ideas for some of the dissolving paper. Just go there and go down the rabbit hole. We'll keep adding things as they come up. All right, so friends, I want to go just quickly through the first Sunday and make just comments along the way. If you have your document in front of you, it might be easier than looking at the slide. But I'm just going to quickly go over it just so we can see if there's any questions around it at all as I go through it. All right, so again, I'm suggesting that as people come in, that you create a silent space, maybe with some sound effects, some recorded sound effects. You can get like water with sound effects with birds and nature sounds, that kind of thing. But what it means is that you're going to have to, as leaders, get ready earlier than maybe some of you do. Some of us do. I'll put myself in that camp too, so that people aren't running around last minute. We want to create an oasis. So it means you might have to back up at the time that people get there to get ready for leaders, right? Prelude, meditative, I call it music for settling. Evoking the mystery. This is the threshold moment, right? And so I have every Sunday folks turning and facing the light as it comes in. We talked about, Chuck and I did that demonstration of the kind of percussion instruments creating that sound. And you'll see that as the light comes down, the leader is saying over the top of it, it is this turning or reorienting ourselves toward the holy that will characterize our season of Lent. What we pay attention to is what we are formed by. So let's begin this season of listening, of hearing that still small voice and finding our own true selves. Now, as you say this, you're not going to say it is this turning and reorienting, right? You're going to use the tone of voice that matches the tone of the room. And if these words that I wrote don't resonate with you, right, tweak them. I want you to adapt to your voice, all right? The worst thing you can do is it can sound like it's being read. This is especially true whenever we get to the synopses, which is coming up here on the second page. We sing, come and rest, come and listen. And then we get to the second page. Here we go. And then there's the synopsis every Sunday, which helps people get into what is the focus for this Sunday. I don't want you to just read it. I want you as a leader to read it, prepare before the service, so much so that you can say it as if it's just coming out of you, not off of a piece of paper. This is really important to me. And I haven't really said this in our other Get Ready webinars enough. I really want you to be comfortable with it. So please tweak it as you need to, get the essence of what it is and put it in your own words, whatever you need to do. Of course, reading it is fine, but practice it so that when you're reading it, it feels like it's conversational and not just reading. Okay, great. It means that we have to prepare ourselves, right? And I actually do that by going in the space and doing it so I can feel what it feels like, not just reading it off of the paper, because when I'm just reading it, sitting at my desk or in my chair to prep, my eyes never come off of it. And then I get in front of people and I start wanting to look at them, and then it feels stilted. So you've got to practice it in the space as if you're going to look up and look at people. All right, great. And so then we repeat that with the echo and it fades into silence. Now, silence, my friends. I have been consulting with churches for a very long time. And one of the things that I have done over the last 15 years or so is to sort of count the amount of silence in silent prayer and average that out on a list I've been keeping. The average of over the years has always stayed right around 8 or 9 seconds. We don't do silence very well in our North American culture, Protestant churches. So if you don't do a whole lot of silence, don't start with a minute. That is a very long time. It might not seem like a long time when you say, oh, let's just do it for a minute. That's a very long time. So start with like 20 seconds or 10 seconds and then work your way up so that by the time you get to Palm Sunday, you're maybe up to a minute. But it's really, don't jar people into the silence. That's also why in the worship guide, I want you to put this: you are invited to sit quietly in the silence without any expectation of what you ought to be thinking. That is such permission giving, right? Don't worry about sounds from children or cold. Simply let them float into and out of your attention. And if you find it difficult to settle your thoughts, contemplate the following. And so for every Sunday, I have this little box that has something that I've written that's very sort of poetic, meditative, but it helps people for whom just sitting in silence is really hard. It gives them something to see and read and focus on. So we want to be hospitable in this, right? Listening, getting still and quiet is not something that some people have a hard time with that. So we want to be hospitable and we want to work our way into it. Okay, and the silence is going to be broken by that bell or singing bowl, a chime or the rain stick, something out of your collection of instruments that can break that silence rather than a human voice breaking the silence. It's always good. All right, so then we go into examine. And examine is the word for spiritual practice of taking stock of our lives, okay, i.e. confession. But I love this word examine. It feels ancient, which it is, but it also is about examining our lives, which could be examining those things we want to change, but also those things that we want to give thanks for. So my suggestion here, and this is repeated every week so that it's just kind of a mantra. I have more repeated things in this series than in any other series that I do, because I think that's the message warrants that. But if you have a small enough congregation, or even if you have cordless microphones, 3 different voices could do this. Just out of that silence, it's broken by the rain stick or the chime, and then somebody says, "For that which then I thought was right, have mercy, God." Pause, right? And so the next voice is another leader, so they're in charge of the pause. "For that which now I regret, forgive me, God." Pause. "For that which hence I know not what to do, guide me, God." Pause. Right? And then the pastor, "Come and rest, come and listen. Know that grace, forgiveness, and guidance are available to you at each and every moment that we turn to receive them." I use this word turn because that is the root of the word repentance, right? So I use that word turn. Thanks be to God. Okay, and then we do that "come and rest" one more time. So that is the whole opening. It will take some time, but that is, in a series about listen, I wanted us to really get into that listening mode. And it's going to be very special, I think. Okay, so I keep looking at the group chat, and it looks like there's not a whole lot of questions, but some really cool comments, so that's awesome. I'm going to keep going here unless, Jenna, you see there's a question I have missed. All right, so we give you suggestions for hymns and songs, and again, this is just to give you an idea of what we consider could be a good choice or good choices. We usually give one that's more traditional or classic and one that's more contemporary, and so we are actually just offering you these ideas, knowing and expecting that if neither of those work for your congregation, you're going to choose something that will. Children's discovery, we talked about that. Now the psalm, there's a psalm in every one of these services, and it is wrapped in this song from the Upper Room Worship Book that is beautiful. I've used it many times. Listen to the still small voice, listen to the still small voice, listen to the still small voice, listen, God is singing, God is singing. That's all it is. Easy peasy. Again, first week, it may just be the choir, or you can put the music in your worship guide, of course, with the right licenses. You can do that. If you don't have the Upper Room Worship Book, this is a perfect excuse to get it, because it is a wonderful collection. You will use it a lot. We use it a lot in the Worship Design Studio as we design our series. So if you don't have it, I would say use this as an excuse to get it. There is an accompaniment version and a pew version. Trying to remember if the pew version has the accompaniment to this. I think it has the chords, but it's a good investment. So I would just say get both. So then there's going to be some reading of Psalms and then singing this in between. Usually you're going to end up singing this about 3 times. So if that feels like too much, then just read the Psalm in between and bookend it at the beginning and the end. And then we have the scripture, and every Sunday that is kind of a Lectio Divina format, which means that we're going to hear it twice. In a Lectio Divina format, a true one, not an abridged one, you would read it more than 2 times, but for time's sake, we're just doing it twice. And what I suggest is that this is where you're going to put your choral piece or your ensemble piece, your band piece, a solo, whatever, your more performative piece where people are going to just listen to the music is in between the 2 readings of the scripture. And I call it music for an inward journey. And in that example worship guide, that is where I have this box where people could, in fact, during the music, reflect on what words from scripture are popping out for them, that kind of thing. So it gives us this practice of learning how to listen to scripture in a different way, just letting it kind of wash over us and seeing what pops out to us. It's a different way of encountering scripture. and then homily. And I'm calling it a homily because homily usually means a brief. I think it's worth not talking too much in a series called Listen. Yes, help us into what it means to be people who listen. Help us into that theme. But you'll notice in the sermons that Eric, if you get those sermons, you'll notice they're not that long. And so I encourage you to follow that format. Let the main thing be the main thing, and offer us a way into the listening and into what's coming next, which is going to the prayer stations. Deepen that journey for us. Rather than filling the space with information. Be more inspirational than informational. Preachers, I'm offering that, issuing that invitation for you on this one. Now, Chuck and I talked about the appointment with God, the Meet Me Here. And again, I have given you some words to give instructions for people. Of course, vary that depending on whether you're doing all 6 stations every week or whether you're just doing one, or how you want to talk about it. Of course, vary those. In the worship guide, you will want to put the instruction for people to leave their booklets in their seats. That will just keep you from having to remind people again and again. So after you sing that Meet Me Here, like Chuck said, morph into some other music that is going to be that music that just helps us to enter into the prayer time. All right, closing prayers. I've written this out. The closing prayer leads us into the Lord's Prayer, and then is where I have prepare to listen in the world. When we come out of that appointment with God, the prayer is going to help us to begin to accelerate the energy, and this is perhaps where you could do the announcements if you must. Keep it to a minimum this season. Maybe simply invite people to look at the insert in the bulletin, the worship guide. Invite them to Lenten prayer practice, especially towards the beginning of the series. And then the hymn or song for moving on. I have always chosen some that have a little bit more energy, right? We've chosen several actually on this series from the Convergence Music Project. And just because I wanted to introduce you to that resource. So you'll see that Help Us to Hear is an example of that, and we've used several of those throughout the series. Now, the benediction. I would love it, pastors, if you would memorize this benediction so you can speak it to people. It's really a good brain. It'll keep your brain young. It'll keep you, it's really a great exercise to just memorize something. So it would be awesome. I imagine you saying this as you walk down the aisle and look in people's eyes as you head out. And now as you move into the world, hold that which is happening on the outside and the inside dear. Love what comes across your path for what it will teach you. Cherish the struggle that stirs in your gut for how it will guide you. And know that all people carry within them the essence of the divine, a holy wisdom given at birth. You're probably at the back by this time, right? So turn around and say from the back, listen every day until we meet again. Get quiet enough to hear the still small voice and to find your own. And may the Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer be with you all. And all God's people say, Amen. And that's where that sung benediction, we're so thankful that you are still speaking. You're still speaking. Yeah, okay. So, woohoo! And then when you finish that sung benediction, invite people to pass the peace at this moment, right? So this series really draws us in to that intrapersonal space that I teach about, right? But if we just stay inward, we are not ready to go out into the world. So this end part of the service is the crescendo to the end has to be then engaging with each other yet again, right? So that's why I have the passing of the peace, which I hardly ever do, but some churches do already, have the passing of the peace at the end. And the music for going out is going to be a postlude that continues that energy that is moving us out rather than back into the meditative space. Okay, friends, woo-hoo! I know that this has been a lengthy time, but I hope this is really helpful to you. I hope that, you will be encouraged and excited and inspired to get your act together, here's what I really want to encourage you to do, and that is to get all your ducks in a row for the entire series in these next 2 weeks before the series starts, so that you can also have some still, small, quiet voice time of your own, and you're not rushing around every week to get things done. See this as production time, and see that that you can get it done. Okay, somebody's asking me about Holy Week. Thank you so much. I needed to say something about Holy Week. So you're going to see it when you get it. Here's the format, and that is that the beginning of it is very much the threshold moment that we have used throughout the season. Now, I have created, as I do in most of my series, I have created one service that you could do that combines communion and, so kind of Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday. So you can do that as one, or you can separate that out and do simply the threshold moment, a homily, and communion for Maundy, Thursday, and then do the threshold moment and the stations for Good Friday. That's up to you. I have created it in one service so that you can see if you have a more successful time at getting folks out once during the week, how that can be done and incorporate a deeply meaningful time for that one time. So again, adapt, adapt, adapt. Now, I have created the scriptures and a paragraph description for every one of 14 stations of the cross. They connect the events of that last 24 hours of Jesus' life to the events in our world, to our own experience of life, so that we're making connections all along the way. There are many ways that you can do the stations. You could create, if you have the space in your sanctuary, you could create the 14 stations for people to go to and all stay in the sanctuary. If you have a small group, you could go and do it all together and have a reader do the scripture and another reader do the paragraph as you go to all 14. You'll see that in the script, I suggest that you could have people come to communion. They take communion, they get a Christmas Eve candle, the kind that we use on Christmas Eve. They light it, and then they take that with them around to the 14 stations. On the last one, they blow it out and then leave in silence. So that's something you could do. Now, you could also do the 14 stations and do a pilgrimage to different places in your church or on your church grounds, depending on where you live in the world and if you're still going to have snow in the ground or not at this point, since it's it's April, it's going to be the last week in March, right? So depending. So you could have the 14 stations where you start in the sanctuary, and then you figure out where would be the best place for us to have these 14 stations throughout the church, or maybe around the church, on the outside or the inside. And you could create a station at every one, a little altar setting with, you could have people light candles in that case. If you're a small group, you could do it all together, or you could just let people do it on their own time and have the paragraph in the scripture written on a piece of paper. Now, I, this summer, created a going to prayer stations, and I actually created a recording of me reading the descriptions for everyone, and then put it on the internet so that people could put their earphones in, and there was music underneath it and my voice doing that. Now, here's the cool thing. At San Francisco Theological Seminary this semester, I have a class that I'm teaching about worship and the arts, and we are going to create these very stations of the cross here on our property. And we're going to film and photograph this. And I'm going to create a recording of me reading the scripture and the descriptions for everyone. Now, you could, if you wanted to, so basically we're going to make a virtual Stations of the Cross based on what I wrote for this series. So you could even have that. I will be sending, when we do that, I'll be sending you the link to where that is. You could have that available for people to do on their own if they wanted to, or you could have them with the earphones and listening to it and pausing it and going to the stations on your property. This is up to you and how like technologically minded, I can't even say it, your congregation is. But in any case, you would want both a written version of it as well as a recording if you do that. Okay, so I line this out in that whole document. I'm very excited about it. Your stations, you may want to print off pictures of things going on in the world. I have not added that to it right now because I want the current event photos that I use, along with perhaps icons of artists from the ages for each one of these, to be very current once we get to the end of March. So I'm going to be doing that way. So anyway, we're going to create it together, and I want to hear what you're doing with it. I really want to hear what you're doing with it. So email me about what you've decided to do with it once you look at the script, once you kind of think about it and how you might do that. If you consider this, if you do one outside on your church property, it could be a self-guided tour of the Stations of the Cross that people in the neighborhood who would never come into a church might do because it feels safer, right? You could do something that goes, and the stations could actually be a walk around town if you're in an urban area, and you could decide places. So tons of ways to do it, all right? It will all depend on your context and your community and what you can pull off. But I'm excited. So, friends, let's call it good. Send us your photos, Worship Design Studio Facebook page. Tag any of your social media posts about this with #listen so that we can pull those off, create an album, and show folks what you're doing. I'm so very excited. Thank you so much for being on. Jenna, did we have any questions that I failed to see?
Yeah, we have one question from Beth. This is a general question related to the prayer stations. How much time do you allow for that part of the service?
What a great question. So it depends on how long your sermon is and how long your service total will be. What I suggest is that you leave at least 10 minutes. And actually, that's a pretty long time. And here is my rule about prayer stations and timing. And that is that if you get over 50 to 75 people, you want to duplicate your stations. So if there's 6 stations, you want 6 on one side of the sanctuary, 6 on the other side of the sanctuary. So the more people you have, the more stations you need. If you get into big numbers, if you're a large church, you may need to only do the one featured station every week and have multiple places for people to do that. Now, Communion Week, I didn't talk about communion. Communion Week is the week that we talk about listening to the texts. And really, this is the station, right? The prayer booklet that's just in your seat. And so they're going to be coming to communion as the station. If you all have all the stations out, people can go during communion to other stations. But if you're just doing the one per week, they'll come to communion and they'll just write in this so that was easier because we have communion in there, right? Now, if you do communion every week, what I always tell people is that I haven't incorporated that. I've only incorporated on the week for churches who do like first Sunday of the month, right? But if you do communion every week, take the communion liturgy that I wrote for week 3, theme and variation, adapt, whatever it is, for each week, and have that be right before you go to prayer stations so that communion is one of those prayer stations. Okay, hope that answers that question. Anything else, Jenna?
That's all for now.
Great. Thanks so much, friends. Many, many blessings. I will be praying for you and watching your email for the recording of this webinar and for the additional materials that we keep having these ideas of how we can support you in this series. So we keep adding more things, but definitely the Holy Week one is coming out. Thank you so much. My prayers are with you. All right. listen.